Howdy folks, and welcome back to another episode of Mingles with Jingles, and we've got plenty to talk about this week. This week I've actually done the unthinkable, and every time I had a good idea for Mingles with Jingles, I actually stopped and wrote it down, so I wouldn't forget when it came to actually recording this episode. So I guess the first thing that I wanted to talk about this week, we're going to cut straight to the action, is, well, the sandbox server in World of Tanks. Ironically, it's not that long ago that I actually made the point that what the hell happened to the sandbox server? Now, whatever you think about whatever has actually appeared on the sandbox server, the whole concept of the sandbox server itself is a fantastic idea. Because the test server, for example, is just there to stress test stuff that's going to appear in the next patch. At the very most, all you're going to see is some fine-tuning of things that appear on a test server. Generally speaking, if it's on a test server, it's going to happen. But a sandbox server is something entirely different. A sandbox server is something that Wargaming can use to test out some of their more extreme ideas and concepts with no guarantee that what appears on the sandbox server is ever going to make it into the finished game in whatever state the sandbox server presents it. It's there for testing out some of the more wild and wacky ideas that they may have had. So, as a concept, I think the sandbox server is fantastic. And it wasn't that long ago, in Mingles with Jingles, where I made the point that, well, what the hell happened to the sandbox server? You know, there was this whole big fuss. Sandbox server was up. They were completely redefining the roles of lights, heavies, media, everything, pretty much in World of Tanks. The server was up for about 2 weeks, and then they shut it down, and then nothing. We didn't hear a thing other than we're looking at the data. And I made this point not too long ago. And then within a week of me making this point in Mingles with Jingles, although to be completely fair, they had actually mentioned it at Wargaming Fest, but I'd missed the announcement. But within about a week of me making this point in Mingles with Jingles, the sandbox server is back up again. And there's a whole bunch of new things that they're testing. Now, I managed to get onto the sandbox server. And what they're doing on the sandbox server at the moment is they're sort of indirectly trying to make heavy tank gameplay a bit more dynamic. And when I say heavy tanks, I mean tanks that have a lot of armour. Not necessarily all heavy tanks. Yes, AMX-50B, AMX-50-100, I'm looking at you here. But tanks like, for example, the Mouse, the E100, the IS-4, you know, that kind of heavy tank. But they're doing it indirectly. They're not actually messing around with the armour thickness or the armour values on any of these heavy tanks. Instead, and this does seem to be something that Wargaming are quite keen on, because they pretty much did something very similar to this in the very first iteration of the sandbox server, something like 7 or 8 months ago. Once again, what they're actually doing is they're messing around with the penetration and alpha damage of everybody else. They're not messing around with the heavy tanks themselves directly. Why do they feel like they need to do that, Jingles? Well, just let me put it this way. If you've ever been in one of those kind of tanks while moving along at your best possible speed, while still getting your weak spots sniped from 300 meters away by some unicum in an Object 140, you'll appreciate exactly why the heavy tanks do need a bit of love. And in my opinion, at least, anything that can be done to encourage heavy tanks to get up front and get in close and actually fight the enemy rather than camping behind a rock or a bush can only be a good thing. I am not, however, entirely convinced that what they're testing out currently on the sandbox server is the way to go about it, although if I'm going to be completely honest, I really don't have any better suggestions. Because what they're actually doing at the moment on the sandbox server is they're reducing the alpha damage of the seriously large caliber guns while increasing their rate of fire to ensure that their damage per minute remains roughly the same. They're also messing around with the shot dispersion of big derpy guns, and here we're talking about guns that typically have a dispersion of 0.4 or worse, to make it far less likely that they're going to be able to snipe a weak spot of a tank 300 meters away moving at 35 kilometers per hour. And finally, they're tinkering with the penetration values of armor piercing and armor piercing composite rigid ammunition. Now, this final point is something that they do. Oh, hello, small cat just jumped into my lap. Don't know if you heard her there. Anyway, yes, where were we? Yes, this final point, messing around with the penetration values of armor piercing and armor piercing composite rigid ammunition. This final point does seem to be something that they are quite keen on, because this is something that they did try out in the first time they had the sandbox server up and running all those months ago. And what they're doing is they're not actually messing around with the penetration values of the guns, but instead, when you currently look at the penetration value of any given gun in World of Tanks, that penetration value is for a target at a range of 100 meters. What they're now doing is making that for a target at the range of 50 meters. So at 50 meters or more, penetration is going to start to fall off with distance, not 100 meters or more. And armor-piercing ammunition, by the time that shot has travelled 500 meters, is going to have lost 18% of its penetration value, and armor-piercing composite rigid ammunition, by the time that shot has travelled 500 meters, will have lost 23% of its penetration value. Now, once again, this is something that they tested the first time the sandbox server was up and running. Although way back then, the penetration drop-off values were a lot more radical than they are at the moment. It does seem like this whole penetration drop with distance is definitely a concept that they're very, very keen on implementing, and they're just fine-tuning the various different values to see how they can make it work. But what's significant here is that there are two types of ammunition that do not suffer penetration drop-off over distance, because that's the way they work in real life. And we're talking high explosive, which nobody really cares about, and we're also talking high explosive anti-tank. And that's significant because, generally speaking, high explosive anti-tank is premium ammunition, and it does not lose penetration drop-off with distance. So, just to summarise, just to make sure you've got all the relevant points here, what Wargaming are trying to do on the sandbox server at the moment is test out a bunch of changes that are aimed at making heavy tank gameplay more dynamic, to reduce the injustice felt by heavy tank drivers when they're moving from cover to cover in their heavily armoured tanks at their best speed of 35 kilometers per hour or whatever it might be, and still getting their weak spots sniped by some Unicum hull down in a tier 10 Soviet medium tank, spamming high explosive anti-tank at their weak spots and hitting them 2 times out of 3. That's the scenario that they're trying to address here. And in order to address it, they're reducing the shot dispersion, or rather they're increasing the shot dispersion of particularly inaccurate guns, i.e. 0.4 accuracy or worse, and they're reducing increasing the penetration drop-off over distance of armor-piercing and armor-piercing composite rigid ammunition. So what's going to change? That's the part I don't get, because generally speaking, tier 10 Soviet medium tanks don't have 0.4 accuracy. They're significantly more accurate than that, so the dispersion changes aren't going to affect them. And high explosive anti-tank ammunition does not suffer any penetration drop-off over distance. So I really don't see what's going to change here. You're still going to get your weak spots sniped by Unicums hull down in Soviet tier 10 medium tanks from 300 meters away while you're moving at your best speed from cover to cover. These changes are not going to affect any of that. These changes are going to affect people who don't play with one hand in their pocket and don't fire premium ammunition all the time. And I feel like these changes are particularly going to punish tanks that fire armor-piercing composite rigid ammunition as their standard non-premium ammunition and do not have a large ammunition capacity. Tanks like, just to pick one example, the Batchat 25T. It's not unusual to see people in Batchats, assuming they play well, still run out of ammunition during the course of a battle, even if every shot they fire hits and penetrates the target. Well, now the shots may still be hitting the target, but they're less likely to penetrate, which means that tanks that have a limited ammunition capacity, assuming these changes go through, and once again I must remind you, there is absolutely no guarantee that these changes are going to go through in their current form, although I would remind you that this is the second time Wargaming have toyed with this whole concept of armor-piercing and armor-piercing composite rigid penetration drop-off over distance. It does seem like they are quite keen on this idea, and all they're doing right now is just fine-tuning the details. But if these changes go through, tanks with very limited ammunition capacity, and we're talking about, well, the Batchat 25T is one example I've just given you, other machines, and we'll expand on this in slightly more detail as well, machines like the shit barn, the FV4005, the FV215B183 for example, they're really going to suffer, particularly the shit barn and the Death Star, because they're reducing the alpha damage of tanks with seriously big guns, 170mm or higher. So that also includes the Jagdpanzer E100. Although they are increasing the rate of fire to ensure that the overall damage per minute remains the same. But here's the thing. If you're in a machine like the Death Star or the Shipbon and you only have 12 rounds of ammunition, it doesn't really matter if your rate of fire's been increased, because if they're reducing the alpha damage, then the amount of damage that you can actually do in a game has just been hard capped. Theoretically, these two machines, which carry 12 rounds of ammunition apiece, and let's face it, if you're in either of the two British Tier 10 tank destroyers, you're firing Hesh or you're doing it wrong, because, well, Hesh does 1750 alpha damage at the moment, and even if it doesn't penetrate, it's probably still going to do about 400 explosive damage. So theoretically, you can do 21,000 damage with your 12 rounds of ammunition in these things. Now, that's never going to happen. Some of your shots are going to miss, some of your shots are going to be absorbed by the tracks, they're going to do minor explosive damage only, but some shots are going to hit and they're going to do full damage, and you're going to one-shot a Tier 10 medium. That's why people play those things. But with 12 rounds of ammunition, you have to increase the ammunition capacity of these machines. Just increasing the rate of fire while lowering the alpha damage to ensure that the damage per minute remains the same, well, that's fine. But these are machines that run out of ammunition when they're playing standard battles, assuming they survive long enough to run out of ammunition, which is no guarantee if you're in the FV 4005 shit barn. So if you're going to reduce the alpha damage and increase the rate of fire to ensure the DPM stays the same, all you're doing is making sure that they're going to run out of ammunition even faster than they currently do. Furthermore, you're also reducing the amount of damage that they're actually capable of doing in a game. So, I mean, if I can figure out that you have to increase the ammunition capacity on these machines, then surely Wargaming can. But guess what? Second iteration of the sandbox server is up, and I've just been on and checked, and they still only have 12 rounds ammunition capacity. But instead of 1750 alpha damage, they're now doing 1450 alpha damage, although in the case of the Death Star, the rate of fire has been increased to 2.14 rounds per minute. But all that's doing is making sure the Death Star runs out of ammunition in the course of a match. Now, once again, I have to drive the point home that this is the sandbox server, and whatever you see on the sandbox server is almost certainly not going to appear in World of Tanks in its finished form, although perhaps some iteration of what you currently see on the sandbox server may appear in World of Tanks in its finished form. But this is where I start to wonder, because I don't have to get 5,000 people onto a sandbox server and then wait for the data cut to come in and analyse it to be able to tell you that if you take machines with limited ammunition capacity, you increase their rate of fire, you lower their accuracy, and then lower the amount of damage that they do when they do actually hit the target, they're going to go through their ammunition faster, hit targets less often, do less overall damage, and spend an awful lot of time with their thumbs up their arse having nothing other than harsh language to throw at the enemy. It just seems like common sense to me, but apparently it's not common enough, because if you go onto the sandbox server right now, you will find that the two top tier British tank destroyers still only have 12 rounds of ammunition apiece. And apart from anything else, the sandbox server is a bloody terrible place to play. It's like the test server, but worse. How can it be worse than the test server, Jingles? Well, I do have to say that the sandbox server does have one thing going for it, as far as gameplay is concerned. You don't start off with a huge amount of credits and a huge amount of gold. So, initially at least, hardly anybody was firing premium ammunition, so that was good. You did get a chance, at least at first, to see how well the armour was going to actually perform on your heavy tanks. But here's the thing, because the sandbox server was aimed at improving the life of big heavily armoured tank drivers, it didn't take very long at all for everybody to suddenly switch to start playing artillery. Because heavy tanks are the easiest targets to hit if you're in artillery. So you get onto a tier 10 game on the sandbox server and there's 10 artillery in the game, 5 on each team. Everybody's team killing each other, and 2/3 of both teams consist of, hey, I can play tier 10 tanks now, lol type players who basically don't have anything higher than tier 4 on the regular server. And you can imagine how much fun that is. I'm there in my type 5 heavy Japanese tier 10 super heavy tank, keeping the tank moving, keeping it angled, trying to bounce shots from the hull down T110E5 200 metres away on the other side of steps, and it's just, oh, Batchat 15558, an entire battery of them, over and over and over and over, and with every shot that hits me I can feel my will to live slipping away. Oh, man. Not fun. But anyway. So that's the sandbox server. Moving along swiftly. Well, anyway, I've been continuing Rita's education in British comedies, which has been very, very successful. We started her off on Red Dwarf, and she absolutely loved it. So she devoured all of those. And I was looking around for other British comedies to try her out on, and we had a bit of a dabble with Father Ted. Now, if you haven't seen Father Ted, I do recommend you go out and watch it. They made 3 seasons of it, and a season of a British TV show is nothing like a season of an American TV show. One season of an American TV show is anything from 18 to 22 episodes. A British TV show, one season is anything from 6 to 8 episodes, so it's not going to take you long to watch them. Anyway, I had high hopes for Father Ted, which is absolutely hilarious. Particularly if you come from a Catholic country, because Father Ted's a show about a bunch of Irish Catholic priests living in a parochial house in some godforsaken island off the coast of Ireland. Unfortunately, when I tried Rita out on it, she just couldn't understand a word that was being said. She just couldn't decipher the Irish accent, which is bizarre, because as English language accents go, the Irish accent is actually very understandable, but she couldn't understand them. So anyway, I shopped around for more British comedies, and because I really, really like the scriptwriter of Father Ted, his name's Graham Linehan, I had a look at some of the comedies that he'd done, and we hit upon The IT Crowd, which again is absolutely bloody hilarious, and she absolutely loved The IT Crowd. Well, I thought I'd give her another try on Father Ted. At this point, she's been living in the UK for well over a year, and she's had some exposure to a whole bunch of different British regional accents, and hooray, this time around, she was actually able to follow what was being said on screen. So we got through all 3 seasons of Father Ted, and tonight over dinner, I actually cooked dinner tonight. It was stir-fried king prawns, all different kinds of peppers, mushrooms and egg noodles in a lemon and herb peri-peri sauce. Very, very nice, I must say. We had a bottle of wine to go with it. So we're sitting down enjoying this meal and watching the last episode of the final season of Father Ted. And the reason it was the last episode of the final season, they only made 3 seasons, was because in 1998, at the age of 45, the actor who played Father Ted, his name was Dermot Morgan, unexpectedly and quite tragically died of a heart attack just after they'd finished filming the 3rd season, so they never made any more. Now Rita knew this because I told her in advance. They only made 3 seasons because the actor who played Father Ted died after they'd finished their 3rd one, so we finished watching the final episode tonight, about an hour ago, and I turned around and she'd burst into tears. That's how much she loved it. Oh, Rita, don't ever change. I think she had a bit of a thing for Father Ted. What can I say? She's got a bit of a thing for older men. Well, anyway, what's next? Oh, yes, I actually wrote this down and meant to mention it. At the start of the video, this is what I was planning on opening Mingles with Jingles with, and completely forgot, so it's a good job I actually wrote this down and checked my notes. In last week's episode of Mingles with Jingles, I mentioned that I'd entered into a partnership with G2A.com, and that appeared to rustle a lot of people's jimmies. G2A.com are basically a reseller of discount game keys. For a huge range of platforms, Steam, Good Old Games, Origin, you name it, they've probably got somebody selling discount game codes for whatever platform. I should probably have done a little bit more homework where this was concerned. You see, how can I put this? I've promoted game code sellers in the past. Paladin Games, for example. Entirely happy to promote Paladin Games. I've pimped them out on Facebook, I've pimped them out here on Mingles with Jingles. I've yet to hear a single person have a complaint with a service provided by Paladin Games. But Paladin Games are slightly different from G2A.com. Paladin Games were a game code retailer. They sourced their own game codes and sold them on to you at a discount. G2A.com started off like that, but due to lack of interest from game developers, they changed from being a retailer to a marketplace. And in a marketplace, what they do is they facilitate the sales of discount game codes from third parties. And that's where the problems can arise. And it's very important that I make that point. That's where the problems can arise, not necessarily where the problems are going to arise. G2A.com have a Trustpilot rating of 9 from nearly 2 million customer reviews. The overwhelming majority of people who use G2A.com are entirely happy with the service provided. And yet when I announced the sponsorship with G2A.com last week, a not inconsiderable number of you reacted as if I'd just gotten in bed with the devil. Well, it prompted me to do a bit of investigating, and it turns out that, here's the thing, if you're not buying and reselling your own game codes, and instead you're just a marketplace facilitating the sale of game codes from third parties, what can happen in a very small number of cases is that, say for example, somebody's stolen a bunch of credit cards. They can use those credit cards to buy a bunch of game codes and then sell them on the G2A.com marketplace. Also, certain unscrupulous resellers can use the G2A.com marketplace to sell you basically a fake or stolen code and then mark that code as stolen so you can't activate it, they've got your money, and then they disappear. Again, I must stress that this is not a common occurrence. This happens in a very, very small number of cases. However, and here's the part that I got a little bit uncomfortable with, generally speaking, if you use somebody's service to buy something from a third party, like Amazon for example, you've got buyer protection built in. If something goes wrong, if the goods aren't delivered, if they're not as described for example, then if all else fails, you can go direct to Amazon and have them step in. If you want to do that on G2A.com, you have to pay them. Now, you don't have to pay them a lot. Their buyer protection plan will cost you €1 a month. But the fact that you have to pay them at all in the first place is, well, I'm not entirely happy with that. There have been certain other controversies with G2A.com involved as well. Riot Games, the developers of League of Legends, a small independent title you may have heard of, really don't like G2A.com. They claim that G2A.com have been reselling fully leveled accounts, which violates their terms of service. They even went so far as to fine a League of Legends player for wearing a G2A.com sponsored shirt during a show match. So there's a fair amount of bad blood on there. Also, Tiny Build Games accused G2A.com of reselling fraudulently obtained game keys, which they claim cost Tiny Build Games something in the region of $500,000. Again, however, to be completely fair and provide a balanced argument, in both cases G2A.com offered to work with the developers of the games in question in order to fix whatever issues and complaints they had. So G2A.com is no stranger to controversy, let's just put it that way. Although, again, I have to stress, in the overwhelming majority of cases, if you buy anything from G2A.com, you're going to be happy with your purchase. But it's the buyer protection policy that I'm a little uncomfortable with. The idea that if you buy anything from them and something goes wrong, you've got no recourse unless you pay them. That's something that I am not too happy about. And for that reason, and that reason alone, I am no longer going to be promoting G2A.com here, Mingles with Jingles, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, whatever. I did have a G2A.com link. Well, you can't see it now if you're sitting here watching Mingles with Jingles, but on the front of the channel page, up at the top, next to the Mighty Jingles logo, I've got the old Cafe Press merchandise link, and there was a G2A.com link up there as well. That's now been removed. I'd also planned to put my G2A.com referral link in the description of every video that I uploaded from here on in, so you could click the link in the description, go to the G2A.com marketplace, buy something, and I'd earn a fraction of everything that you spent with them. But yeah, I'm not going to be doing that either. If I'm going to promote something and associate my name with something, I want to be 100% comfortable with whatever it is I'm promoting. 99% is close, but it's not good enough. So, to everybody who, after last week's episode of Mingles with Jingles, claimed that I was sponsoring international terrorism by associating myself with G2A.com, sorry, but you're going to have to find something else to complain about. Well, the next thing that I wanted to talk about was to do with World of Warships and the future of game development as far as that title is concerned. I saw something this week that amused me a lot, actually. Although it's actually quite a serious issue, but, well, the implications were pretty funny. It was to do with aircraft carrier gameplay in World of Warships. Basically speaking, playing an aircraft carrier in World of Warships is a hell of a lot more complicated than playing any other class of ship. You're basically playing a completely different game. It's like a real-time strategy built into a slow-paced third-person shooter. The amount of micromanaging that goes on when you're playing an aircraft carrier is astronomical. And so Wargaming want to make aircraft carrier gameplay much more accessible for the average player, and I include myself in that category. I tried playing aircraft carriers back during the closed beta test, and I managed to get as far as Tier 5. The American carrier, which back then at Tier 5 was the USS Independence. And no, wasn't very good at it, didn't find it particularly interesting. When the game went live, I never bothered researching any of the aircraft carriers, although I do have the USS Saipan, the premium Tier 7 carrier, and I played that for just long enough to know that aircraft carrier gameplay was not for me. So any steps that Wargaming can take to make aircraft carrier gameplay less of a ball ache, because it is, there's so much micromanaging going on. I mean, if you're sailing a battleship, destroyer or cruiser, you've got one ship, one unit to worry about. If you're taking command of an aircraft carrier, you don't just have to steer your own ship, although a lot of aircraft carrier players never bother steering their own ship, and more on that in a moment, because that's the funny part. But if you're doing it properly, at least, you're not just steering your own ship, you've got multiple different strike groups and fighter groups in the air at the same time that you have to manage. There's just a colossal amount of stuff to do in order to be a competent aircraft carrier player. And so any steps they can take to make that more accessible, to cut down on the micromanagement and streamline the interface, for example, and make it so that mere mortals can actually jump into an aircraft carrier and not make a complete arse out of themselves in the first half a dozen games that they play, and eventually get to grips with it and not be shit, can only be a good thing. And this is where the funny part arises, because I was watching the Facebook Live Q&A that they had this week with the World of Warships developers, and they were talking about the lack of aircraft carriers in random battles in World of Warships. And this is something that is particularly annoying for me, because I like to play my American cruisers, and my defensive fire cooldown is wasted like 5 games out of 6 because there are just no aircraft carriers. So aside from, it's a waste of time using it on spotter planes and catapult fighters, but anyway, that's another subject entirely. So yes, what they were basically saying in the Facebook Live Q&A is that there are 2 different types of aircraft carrier players currently in World of Warships. You've got a very small percentage of players who have the skill to micromanage to the degree that you need to be a good aircraft carrier player. It's almost approaching StarCraft 2 levels of clicks per minute, right? In order to not be shit at playing an aircraft carrier. And you've got maybe, 5 to 10% of the current aircraft carrier player base fit into that category. Everybody else is shit. They never bother moving their carrier. They sit in the same place the entire game, paying no attention, more like artillery players in World of Tanks, when there's a light tank 10 metres away from their arse pumping shot after shot into them, and they're sitting there in their top-down view going, what's that banging noise? That is the majority of aircraft carrier players at the moment in World of Warships. That's not exactly what they said, but that's pretty much what they meant. And I thought that was hilarious. And on that bombshell, that's it for this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles. I hope you enjoyed it, and as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.